hundreds of Americans died in the seconds during which the planes hit the Trade Center, and thousands more were crushed and torn apart when the towers collapsed. This included hundreds of heroic firemen, the fear showing in their faces, who went in anyway to try to rescue their fellow citizens. We should be outraged by this terrible loss from this terrible crime, and we need to demand justice. If we don't see to it that the guilty parties are punished, we're inviting them to kill us next time. So we have to demand justice. But we have to be careful. You can't just believe everything you hear. In fact, President Bush himself has very rightly warned us.
Let us never talk outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
But to millions of proud Americans, it was the president's conspiracy theory about 19 amateur hijackers with box cutters, supposedly directed by some nut in a cave, somehow overcoming the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, that seemed like an outrageous conspiracy theory to us. As early as the next day, September 12th, millions, literally millions of Americans thought that the idea that the Pentagon had been hit showed that this was an inside job. We were supposed to believe that a hijacked, slow-moving 757 could penetrate Pentagon airspace, could penetrate missile defenses, could penetrate defenses designed to stop supersonic jet fighters and bombers, and could do it 50 minutes after everyone in the country knew we were under attack. Pretty outrageous. The following day, September 12th, we were asked to believe a more detailed and more ridiculous story, that the plane that flew into Pentagon airspace then made a 240-degree turn around the building, exposing the plane's long and broad side to attack from ground defenses, all without a shot being fired. On September 12th, we were told that if the plane had not made this incredible turn, if it had just headed straight into the Pentagon, it would have crashed into the most high-level, top-secret area of the Pentagon. It would have crashed into the offices of Donald Rumsfeld and all the top brass. But instead of flying straight ahead, it made this ridiculous turn so that it crashed into an area that had been under construction for weeks before, into an area that had been specially reinforced during those weeks to make it more able to withstand just such an attack. And it crashed into an area that, because of the construction, was mostly empty and only contained people who had been judged by the killers as deserving death. Let's say that again. If 9/11 was an inside job, the people who were present at the Pentagon and who had been assigned to work in this very special area had been very specifically selected for death. And then we had to sit and watch as in the next
Welcome to the Gilchrist experience. I guess you're wondering why I would play something like this in a political season where we're looking to vote in a new president. But I just wanted to bring up the original lie of the 21st century. This falsity of planes knocking down buildings on 10 stories high and a building falling by fire. It's never happened in the history of the world that a building on 10 stories can fall from fire, burn down from fire, or collapse by fire. This is all planned genocide, planned demolition.
The stories that we've been told regarding 9/11 will never actually be proven or debunked. There are truths that I'm sure...
Well, it's proven right here.
Well, the proof of it in terms of who did the what, why the buildings fell, and how they did it, some of that I am convinced we will never know, because there are people who went to their graves who knew the truth, and that truth will never be exposed. It is left to us to sort through the headlines that we've been given, to try to understand who's lied to us, why they've lied to us, even though we may never know the truth. What did Bush know? What was the involvement of the American intelligence community? How was it possible that the media were just told the mark that was told to them by the United States government without serious investigation being done by the media? All of this, we may never know the answers, but I think, years later, have to understand that the truth has not been told to us. And that's a critical part of what we have to deal with.
Well, the truth is in this item, the truth about 9/11. It's all planned demolition. It's thermite that slashed the beams, knocked out the center core of the building. This building was built to take on a 747, heavier than the one that hit the two. And a building has never fallen, a 110-story building, fallen by fire.
The physics of it, we have to spend some time on. What is thermite?
2,800.
How does it burn so quickly?
All right, here, I tell you what. Hello? I'm about to run the second 9/11.
Yeah, the details of that is something that we need.
Well, here, we'll go a little deeper into it since Owen has some doubts. Let's go into the second section here, where they explain how the beams were...
The architecture of the building.
That's right.
And how the explosions and high temperature burning.
I have all the proof right here.
All of that is what we need to make sure that our viewers understand and how that plays into the stories that we've
16
been
years
told.
ago. A lot of people don't even know anything about this.
A lot of truths have not been told about that.
So run the second part of 9/11-2. Yeah.
Week, Richard Myers, the man in charge of North American air defenses that day, the single individual most responsible for the disaster, instead of being court-martialed and shot, was instead promoted to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Outrageous. Simply outrageous. On the morning of September 11th, many building engineers and demolition experts were disturbed as they watched the collapse of the Twin Towers. No steel frame building in the history of the world had ever collapsed in this manner. A few had been knocked down by earthquakes, but never by fire, or even by planes. In 1945, the Empire State Building was hit by a U.S. Air Force B-25 bomber, killing 14 people, but causing no significant damage to the building's steel frame. The designers of the World Trade Center anticipated such hazards.
The building was designed to have a fully loaded 707 crash into it. That was the largest plane at the time. I believe that the building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners because this structure is like the mosquito netting on your screen door, this intense grid, and the jet plane is just a pencil puncturing that screen netting. It really does nothing to the screen netting.
A 707, by the way, is heavier than the planes that hit the World Trade Center. And 20 minutes after the second plane crash, when nearly all the jet fuel had been burned up, the buildings just seemed to explode, throwing steel girders weighing hundreds of tons for hundreds of feet, burying them into buildings on the other side of the street. Virtually all of the fuel from the planes had been consumed in the first 20 minutes. Where did all this explosive force come from? But most of all, the engineers were disturbed by the apparent collapse of the enormously strong central core of the towers. An indestructible rectangle of 47 box beam columns made with 4-inch thick steel at the base, tied together with a tight net of more steel girders and trusses, making up the backbone of the World Trade Center. Even if the floors had pancaked around it, after the floors collapsed, we should have seen the central core standing tall, rising out of the smoke. And we do see parts of the core, for a moment, standing in the smoke, before they simply evaporate inexplicably. Buildings have pancaked in the past, but they looked like this, not like this. Why do we see no pancaked on top of each other? And so people began to look more closely at the video of the collapse, and they began to see more evidence that something else was going on, that the buildings had been taken down not by exploding planes, but by explosive charges planted in the building. In a professional demolition, you see what are called squibs, where the explosives occasionally vent their explosive force out the side of the building. And sure enough, when you look, you can see squibs going off all over. The specialized explosive used by professionals to demolish a steel frame is called thermate. It is placed in key locations and melts large steel joints in an instant. which is precisely what we see here. Look closely at this photograph. This is one of the box girders of the central core. Look at it. It's been clearly melted. Although jet fuel does not create anything near the heat necessary to melt steel.
All right, so that's living proof. It was planned demolition, no doubt about it. All right?
The most significant question...
Was that convincing enough?
Oh, definitely. There is
All
proof
right.
there that it was not just the planes that made the headlines that caused the demolition of the buildings. The most interesting and most important, I suppose, part of it is that who were the ones who did the planning? Who were the ones that had this done, and to what end? Was it done for profit? Was it done for a political gain? Why was this being done? And who were the people who benefited most from it? Certainly, the destruction of the World Trade Center towers led to billions and billions of dollars in expenditures, and somebody made a huge profit
Silverstein?
Of the rebuilding of that. So that's something that we are very much...
The property was leased out 6 months prior to the fall of the towers by Silverstein. I forget his first
certainly,
name.
the new owner of the World Trade Center, and the huge profit that he made is something that needs to be examined.
Of dollars out
now,
of it.
who is appropriate?
The only reason I'm bringing this up is because we have a real estate tycoon presently running for president, and we have Dr. Jeffries on the scene. So I just want to run one other item here. Give me let's go to. As soon as Jeffries gets...
yeah, it's a matter of who profits from it and who would be the ones motivated, and then the political cover-up. Because to say that it's just these Arab terrorists, you know, is it just a matter of propaganda? Were they motivated? Were they paid by other people? Or were they just a shill and a cover for destruction that was planned so other people can make billions of dollars and blame it on these quote-unquote Arab terrorists?
Well, the Bush family had a beef with Hussein, Saddam Hussein, and the son decides to take out. All right, just run the one on Jalen. I have a great granddaughter that did a piece that I want Doc to see. We have Professor Jeffries coming on, so we have to bypass the. I just want you to see this one piece that my great-granddaughter did. It's called, we went to the Metropolitan Museum. I'm sorry we're leaving 9/11, but Doc is a little closer to the time I expected him. All right, so let's run Jalen Lewis, my great-granddaughter. All right. That is my great-granddaughter. She's 10 years old.
Hey, hey.
And we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is a month and a half ago. And we stayed in there 5 hours. This is just a part of it. And she's a fantastic photographer. And she's, you know, I've just showed her how to shoot the camera. I've taken her to Sharpton's, and she gets in there, and they love her in there. She gets in there. I mean, she just has such an eye. And when I took her to the Met there, and she saw this, you know, the statue of the black, and trying to teach her that the ancient Egyptians were black people. And to her amazement, she saw this statue, and it looked like a black man standing there, all regal. And it's just amazing to see the museum through a 10-year-old's eye. And that's what you just observed. So,
And it was wonderful. And so you have the right to be proud.
yeah, oh, she's a great photographer.
Baby
You
girl's got
also
some good
have to
skills.
assume responsibility
What?
for going deep. In other words, the knowledge that she filmed, you will have to work on it and expand her deep understanding of
It's
it.
exactly why I have you here today, and that's exactly why I showed you that. So you're going to help me with all this. So now how do I explain to her that in our environment, Egypt was actually full of black people?
Well, first and foremost, you need a chronology, meaning a timeline, and then you need a epistemology. How do you know what you know? And so, and then a geography. Africa is a continent, and the Nile Valley is one of the great rivers in the continent. And Egypt and south of Egypt, Nubia, is in Africa.
Right.
That would be the first thing. That the creation of the Middle East concept was to strip Africa of its geographical and historical importance.
Okay.
And so you'd have to try to explain that once you put the facts together and once you synthesize those facts, you'll have a deeper understanding and appreciation. And then the concept of a stolen legacy. People actually, over a period of hundreds of years, have systematically stolen the African legacy.
Right.
And have said that Africans contributed nothing to history. And even the greatest European scholars and the most progressive, so-called, like Karl Marx, could not give Africa a meaningful play in history. So our great struggle, and that's the great struggle that Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and others have led, is to restore our history to the world.
Okay.
And so it's a fantastic filming that she's done. She's touched, chronologically, she's touched the Old Kingdom, where the pyramids were built and stand as the majestic contribution of Africans to civilization. That's at least 2,500 BC. There's nothing in Greece, there's nothing in Rome.
Right.
And then she also had Mentuhotep. That was an image that was shown. And Mentuhotep was the founder of the Middle Kingdom. So after 500 years of glory, from 3100 BC to 1600 BC, that's the Old Kingdom, the pyramid building. Then you had a period of domination for 100 or so years by the Hyksos. And then you have another 500 years, another renaissance, another rebirth, another 500 years of glory. So the initiator of that process, she actually filmed. And that is another 500 years of glory from 2100 BC until 1600 BC. And at that time, they renewed the writings, that the literature, the science, the mathematics, the philosophy was even more perfected by these Africans. And they came from the South. The renewal always comes from the South, and the South is the blackest part of that area. And then after the Hyksos are thrown out, 1500 BC, then you have the New Kingdom, and that's the one we usually focus on. That's the leader of that was Ahmes, King Ahmes, and his daughter was Ahmes Nefertari. and she became one of the great leaders. So in the New Kingdom, the women play a magnificent role as co-rulers or ruling by themselves. Queen Hatshepsut ruled by herself for many years. And after you had the Amos dynasty with Nefertari Amos as a key figure, and you had the Thutmose dynasty with Hatshepsut as a key figure and rivaling her relative Thutmose III, who became Thutmose the Great. Then you have my favorite dynasty. And Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark used
What year are we talking?
We're talking the establishment of it 1500 BC.
Okay.
And then the various dynasties ruling for 100 years or 150 years or 200 years. But after the Amos dynasty, which established this new rise,
Okay.
then you had the Thutmose dynasty, which is the famous ruler of Queen Hatshepsut, who is the only woman that has a temple in the Valley of the Kings. And then you have the
Did you see
great
the beginning of this video?
Yes.
In the first beginning?
Right.
Where you saw the Greek pictures?
Right, you have to go through the Greek
That was the beginning.
hall. You have
That's
to go
we're
through the
talking
Greek
about
hall in order
300.
to get.
Okay.
Yeah, but the Greeks are not in the 3,000 years of African development from 3300 BC to 300. Greeks come into the picture.
Late.
500 to 300 BC is the Greek Golden Age, the age of Pericles.
Okay.
And it's a golden age because they were able to come into the African world and sit at the feet of the African sages and then develop their synthesis of African knowledge. But they're not in the earlier periods.
I've been told that the Egyptians actually built the Pantheon. The Pantheon?
Parthenon.
No, that would not be. The ancient Africans of the Nile, which we call the Kemites, they call themselves, they reference their land, Kem, the black land. The Kemites were a mix of African peoples, and they ranged for 4,000 years before there was any serious European input.
Okay.
The first of the Europeans would have been the Greeks.
Okay.
The Greek Golden Age is a 300-year period from 500 to 300 BC. That's when the Greeks, inspired by the African pillar temples, built the Parthenon. The Parthenon is a reflection of the great Luxor temple, the Temple of Laset, which was built 1500 BC.
But the Greeks built it and learned from the Egyptians?
The Greeks sat at their feet.
Okay.
And they acknowledged the African gift that was given to them. It's later Europeans who could not accept that people of color had made a contribution of enormity to the world. They gave the world high culture and civilization.
So you walk into the Metropolitan Museum.
Yes.
And the first thing you see are the Greeks there.
Yes.
As if they started the whole thing.
Well, we need to understand the politics and the economics of the museum, how it operates, and if the greatness of Africa...
We know how they're selling it.
Right, that's the point, because if the greatness of Africa were at the door, they may turn away money-making customers. So there's political reasons for the way that the museums are set up, and they will not dare say things that they think would affect their income. So presenting white people coming out of Europe as being the great ones who did things to some way humanize the African.
But we know that.
But we have to
I'm presenting this to my 10-year-old great-grand, and I'm saying that Egyptians were black.
Well,
and she sees, in the beginning, nothing but Greeks. And the only real black structure that we could see is with the broad nose. And I say, well, look at this guy, you know? Look at him. Doesn't he look like somebody from 125th Street?
but it's not just pigment, and it's not just characteristics. The thing that lets us know that the cultures of the Nile Valley were African was their philosophical base. They believed in the centrality of the female principle, the balance and harmony of the male and female principle. They believed that the living life was just a segment of the greater life after death. And so they built their temples and their institutions based upon deep philosophical concepts. Europeans stole the legacy. That's why you have the Washington Monument sitting in the middle of Washington, D.C. And no one says that's the African monument that was refashioned for George Washington. It's an African monument symbolizing a deep philosophical principle of rebirth and resurrection. And so when the Americans were trying to build their capital and create a link to the ancient past, they did tap into the Nile Valley. Everything of significance in Washington is laid out based upon the philosophy and the ideology and the architecture of the Nile. Even the Pillar Temple that is the Lincoln Memorial.
Okay.
Someone would say it's a copy of a Greek temple. Yes, it would be, but the Greeks copied the African pillar temples.
All right.
And they have Lincoln sitting there like he's a pharaoh. If you go to the Cairo Museum, the greatest museum in the world, you'll see in the great courtyard, you'll see the great court, you'll see Amenhotep III sitting there like Abraham Lincoln is sitting in his pillar temple.
Well,
but Amenhotep III
wasn't Abraham Lincoln black?
Amenhotep III has sitting next to him a black woman, Queen T. And she's sitting with equal majesty. It's a 2.5-story statue. Everybody who goes to the Nile wants to see that. And there is it. She was with him for 36 years when he ruled for a new renaissance. And he created this great temple was set to be the teaching institution for tens of thousands. So if there is a Columbia University where I got my 2 degrees, master's and PhD, has pillar temples. One sitting in the middle of the campus, and at the southern part of the campus, they have a pillar temple that has on each of the pillars a Greek, Socrates, Hakokrates, Fakakras, all of them are on the top. But they a direct copy out of the Great Lodge, the pillar temples in the Nile Valley. But they did not have the temples columns dealing with individuals. They dealt with philosophical principles. And so the great court which Amenhotep III had built, the Sun Court, has 42 columns, and each column represents the 42 principles of Ma'at, that I have not killed, that I have not defamed the gods. Africans lived philosophy. They built it into their culture. Europeans copied it and didn't understand the deep values. So the Europeans built a male-oriented culture and civilization. The Greeks worshiped men. Africans clearly had the balance and harmony. And that's why Queen T was with her husband 36 years when he took the lead in giving Africans a renaissance. But Queen T is a part of the miseducation because her grandson is King Tut. Everybody knows about King Tut because of the gold mask. The European is mesmerized by these things, but the deep relationship is that King Tut is the grandson of this great woman who ruled not only with her husband, and that she's clearly black, with an afro, from the southern part of the... She ruled for 36 years with him. When he died, she ruled for a dozen years by herself. There's a whole literature called the Amarna Revolution in which principal kings and people outside of Egypt were writing her, asking her to please maintain the same type of relationship that your husband maintained with us. And then she saved the throne for her great son, Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, who built a new city of God because there was so much prosperity coming into the Nile Valley when they had their imperialist age, when they went outside of the Nile and they started conquering. So much wealth came in that the spiritual essence of Nile Valley culture was being lost. And so Akhenaten and his mother...
Well, that was King Tut's father, Akhenaten.
Well, yes, they say it was King Tut's father. Whether it was or not, it wasn't King Tut's father.
Okay.
It wasn't Nefertiti's child.
Okay.
It was one of the other wives of the pharaoh Akhenaten.
Okay.
And so until you understand a little of the complexity of these things, but the key thing is that so much wealth came in and polluted the culture that they decided to purge it of the pollution of worrying about material things. And they left the largest city in the history of the world up to that point, the city of 100 gates, called Waset. And the ancient Greek times, Thebes. But in the Arab times, Luxor.
But Akhenaten promoted one God.
The consciousness of one God was reaffirmed. The oneness of God is a part of ancient culture. The various things, the various attributes that we call gods are attributes of God. There is a oneness of God.
But Akhenaten promoted...
He was reaffirming it. He didn't pull it out of the air.
Okay.
He was reaffirming a consciousness of the oneness of the universe that the Africans understood.
Then what happened after he died? They dismissed everything he's talked about?
No, they overthrew his revolution. The priests who were profiting from the wealth that was coming into the country, the priests of Amun, overthrew the process, but still within the culture there is this oneness of God. But the fact that he could leave a great city like Thebes and go into the desert and build a new city of God. Now, I had a chance to go there. They deconstructed it. They took the blocks of his temples and whatnot, and they put them in later temples. So a previous generation of greatness was being overwhelmed by a new group of folks coming. So it's a fantastic history to see the changes and transformation.
All right.
And to know that it is our history. So that's the beauty.
Just bring an update so the people that aren't really familiar with African history.
I was trying to, and you were just...
No, but you complicated.
You would not even let me deal with this one family, King Tut's family. And every child goes to school and every child on earth knows about the gold of King Tut, a boy king. But he was insignificant. He died at 19. He contributed nothing to the greatness of the Nile Valley. He inherited it, but he was not around long enough before he was overthrown or murdered. However, his grandmother was one of the greatest women in the history of the world, sitting on the throne of Egypt, 1400 BC, ruling with her great husband, rebuilding the temples and glorifying the consciousness of God. She is a clearly Nubian background, but she is not in the history books. The history book that Malefia Santi developed and my wife contributed, and Booker Coleman, Brother Kaba contributed, and others, that history book has the images of these great Africans. So I hope to give you a copy of that book so that you can use that to teach your...
All right, let me tie into what we started the show with. We started the show with 9/11. I started off the show with the bringing down of the two towers.
Right.
And the beginning of the 21st century, the first big lie. All right, now we're in year 2016. We have a female coming into her rights. I think she's worked for it, contradictory to what her husband did, which everybody's blaming her for what her husband did. Now, in an analogy of women being really the true rulers, as in ancient Egypt, do you see a new dawn coming with Hillary?
Right. No, I don't want you to make that comparison now, and I don't want you to say that women were the true rulers. Rulership in the African consciousness had many levels. Men ruled legitimately, women ruled legitimately, elders ruled legitimately, wise people ruled legitimately, males or females. So you have to see the sophistication of African culture to appreciate it. When you see other people who stole it, you can see how they put in male domination as the key factor, the women not having a place. In the African tradition, in most of the traditional groups, you have matrilineal succession. That doesn't mean female rule. It's not matriarchy, but it's matrilineal, that the ruling line passes down through the female. And that gives the female a special place in the ruling process because, as people joke, about mamas, papas maybe, but mamas, in other words, you know who the mother is, and the father may be. So what I'm saying is that there's been an explosion for the last 50 or 60 years of the truth. And now we have a chance to make the truth a part of the development of the human family in a real way. And so that, I was just trying to make the point that a black woman like Queen T, 1400 BC, Europe had no culture of significance. There was no temples, nothing in Europe at that time when a black woman was ruling.
In 1400 BC?
An important part of European development is the caves. You can't, if the Great Wormian Ice Age ruled for the last 100,000 years, the Wormian Ice Age dominated. Since that time, there's been a warming. And so if you're in the ice, the only place you can survive is in shelter. So there's a reality to the experience of Europe in the ice, and Africa and Southern Asia in the sun. And we need to appreciate that ecological dimension.
All right, let's discuss your struggle trying to get this information out for the last 50 years.
It's been glorious. And
All right.
if there is no struggle, there is no progress. It's been glorious. I mean, can you see me 80 years old?
That's right.
In my culture, my wife, we just came back from Africa.
Okay.
And we were in the Gambia where the Africans have been given the responsibility of putting before the UN a resolution on our heritage that has been stolen and messed with, on slavery, the slave system that devastated our people for hundreds of years,
Right.
colonialism, which was a
Right.
trick by the Europeans wanting our wealth and saying they will give us, civilize us, and then independence, in which these African nations and Caribbean nations have a mock stateship, many states that are trying to operate as on the international arena, and they do not have the capacity. So you need a unity of the Caribbean. You need
Say that again? A unity of the Caribbean?
Pan-Africanism.
one
Dr.
country
Clark
can't do
said
it.
it best. Pan-Africanism or perish.
How is that possible?
If you do not have Pan-Africanism, meaning the unity, we're going to continue to have difficulties. And so we can focus on Hillary Clinton, but that's not our historical path. Our historical path is coming out of a dehumanizing process that had the founders of the human family, the mothers and fathers of the human family, relegated to being things like the tobacco or the cotton or the mule or the sugar cane. We came out of a system established in the Americas, for example, in the United States, in Brazil, in other parts of the Caribbean, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of Negroes. I mean, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Let's take those rules.
The fathers have been. The nation was built on a falsehood, on a lie. It was not built on freedom and equality and justice. It was built on stealing the lands of the native indigenous peoples. It started out as a basic lie. The land does not belong to King George or Louis IV or anybody, or the Spanish monarchs. It belongs to the Native Americans.
How do we change it now?
And in order to work the land, they could not get the European populations to work the land, so they brought Africans out of Africa to work the land. So it's founded on theft of land. It's founded on working people, the founders of the human family, and dehumanizing them. It's amazing that we're still here, but it is our strength, our resilience that has allowed us to beat back the lie, and now we stand on the truth. The nation was founded on inequality, the nation was founded on injustice, and the nation was founded on the worship of rich white men with property and power. And that's what you see now. You have Donald Trump playing the game of the rich white men,
the ultimate
with
oligarch.
property and power, the ultimate oligarch. And then you have the woman in the picture who is trying to put some balance. And here you have the struggle of the European male-dominated woman, anti-woman culture, fighting against this female figure. Now, in the African consciousness, it's not what she has done. It's not what she did not do. For us, it is in the rulership, in the raising of culture and civilizations, in the raising of the babies. There's a complementarity of the male and the female. And quite clearly, what we see is a struggle for white male dominance. And that's the role that Hillary plays, being an anchor against that. I don't want to hear what scandals was involved, what they didn't do, what they did. We as Africans have to do for self. And we cannot wait for some saviors from the white folks to do. George Washington wasn't a savior. Thomas Jefferson wasn't a savior. In fact, he was the contradiction of whiteness. He contradicted from his head, through his mouth, through his heart, down through his private parts. He was the ultimate contradiction. And he's the man who stole the phrase, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He put the happiness in there. John Locke, the great English theoretician, had, coming out of the feudal culture of Europe, he had not happiness, but property. So Jefferson is a contradiction. America is a contradiction. And now the web of contradictions are unfolding. But the question is, we're in the middle of them. We're going to be damaged by them. So we need to have a consciousness to build outside of the Europeans.
So how do we deal with Hillary Clinton as president
We don't
come
worry about
2017?
individuals. You don't get caught up in individuals and what individuals have done and can do for you. That creates a paralysis of analysis.
Okay.
No individual runs this system. The system
Right.
selects individuals to represent it, but it is the system, and it's the system of white supremacy. We can only survive in it. We're at the level of survival culture. In order for us to thrive, we need our own system. We need a system centered around Africanness, and that's what's happening over the next 100 years. There's
Okay.
a rise of African peoples and peoples of color basing their culture and civilization on their values, which are shared values, on their understanding of the universe, that we are all part of the universe.
Okay.
And so we're now in the survival culture. Supporting the Democrats would be part of our survival culture, but don't expect development to come out of that. In order for us to have development, we have to control economics, politics, and culture. That's the foundation of anything. Foundation of the cell of the body, foundation of the body itself, foundation of the universe, foundation of the ecology that we have to live in. So we've got to have a process where we control our economics. We're very productive, but we don't control the economics.
So how do we do that?
You need a political apparatus not to support the traditional Democratic or Republican. You need a political apparatus that supports your economic stake in the system.
I got
a
proposal. I got a proposal here that I think can start it off. I like to see a community bank in Harlem. You know, I want all the churches in Harlem to put their money, their Sunday deposits in this one community bank. All right, we'll start from there. We'll start importing goods from Africa.
The economic agenda coming out of Gambia as it applies to our people here in Harlem. But what would be the prescription?
Well, I just left the west coast of Africa at an international gathering of African and African-American, African-Caribbean leaders. And it was a symposium to prepare a plan. Nothing happens without a plan. And so this is the beginning of putting the plan in place. And it was to deal with our heritage, that we are the original people. It was to deal with enslavement imposed upon us by outside groups, particularly the European system of exploitation. Deal with colonialism, which was the European attempt to rape and pillage the wealth of Africa, and the new nation building, which is the Europe attempt to have a neo-colonialism. They didn't want African nations to control their economics, to have a real politics that made any sense, and to have a culture that dealt with their values. They imposed whiteness on us, so we got to purge ourselves of that.
What can we ask people who are working towards consciousness to do or to be in the contemporary world as a practical matter, other than seeking out knowledge, to read the agenda, to read what you did in Gambia, to read and to prepare for the education of our next generation? What specifically can we ask of our people that they do or that they prepare?
Knowledge is power, and African knowledge is African empowerment. You can't sit in a classroom and worship the Greeks who sat at the feet of the Africans and who borrowed African knowledge and thank the Africans for the contributions they made. You can't sit in a classroom which is centered around white supremacy. And so once we analyze correctly, no, we're doing that now.
Okay.
And so I'm saying what was happening in the Gambia was the African Union of the 50-plus nations gave the Gambia the lead to take the initiative to speak for all of the African nations and Africans outside. So they're now going to deal with our history and the legacy and the art that was in the museums. African art was a part of the culture, not to be just in museums. It recognized the heritage and legacy. And the wealth of Africa is still being super exploited. The European systems are using Africans as puppets to continue the drain on the wealth. The Congo is a perfect example of over 100 years. The Congo has been pillaged and devastated by the worst exploitation in history. Where you talk about a genocide that's still alive, and that goes back from the 1900s when one European, Leopold II, was given the right to control the wealthiest part of the planet, which is 80 times larger than his kingdom, Belgium. And the Europeans affirmed this by their various meetings. For example, the Berlin Conference, where they sat down to divide Africa. Once the
What
real
was that,
history,
1895?
1894, 95, the Europeans met for 14 months to divide up Africa because they knew they could not go into technology and the industrial age without the wealth of Africa. Now they know they can't go into the high technology of the internet and all of that, and without Africa.
coltan,
without Africa. We're the only people who say we want to sit next to white folks and have the comfort of being in the white culture when the world is going to be, all the world is looking at Africa because they need that wealth for the goals that they have in place. The Chinese have their own particular plan. The Arabs and the oilists have their own particular plan.
And what we can do with Gimme and the Congo situation. I know it's a difficult one.
We're trying to do it in an hour's time, but it's going to take a lifetime.
Can I bring Gimme on the show and we have a plan attack to deal with that $24 trillion?
Yes, but it should be part of a larger process of looking at, and that's what the Gambian thing did. It brought scholars from all around to look at what was the intellectual heritage of Africans. It's the greatest intellectual heritage of the world. We need to have that redone and put as part of the education of the world. What is the meaning of the African continent? It's the wealthiest part of the continent, but its wealth is not being used for the benefit of African people.
In the interest of time, is there a specific website that you would commend to our viewers, or a specific place that they can contact in order to get some of the knowledge, in order to take some of the initial steps that our larger audience would want to strengthen the African presence in 2016?
I appreciate, brother, that you're focusing us on what can happen. This is not a one-shot deal. This is a process. This is changing the consciousness of African peoples for eternity. And one of our great scholars, Dr. Wade Nobles, has said very clearly, African people everywhere suffer greatly from a shattered consciousness and a fractured identity. The processes that we experienced, my wife and I and others, this past couple of weeks, is the beginning of that firming up what our consciousness is and the healing process is going to take place. So we will be able to come on this airway and be able to give people the data and information where they can tap into that. Most recently, we have been able to establish a Jeffries Foundation, and people who want to get some of the information on legacy can contact us at rljfoundation.org.
rljfoundation.org.
And as this information unfolds and as we build our whole Pan-African, as Dr. Clark said, it's a question of Pan-Africanism or perish. We have no alternative. Clearly you have the Democrats having their agenda and the Republicans having their, and there's no African or black agenda within those contexts. So that's survival culture for us. But once we control our economics, once we put a political apparatus in place based upon our principles of government, once we understand that culture is not things, culture are deep values, and move our people out of the mindset, if I buy a big car, if I have somebody's hair hanging down my back, then I'm somebody. When you're surviving, you're in survival culture. We want to move into developmental culture where we can control our wealth and control our politics and control the culture so that people can do like your granddaughter did, walk into a museum. Great-grand. Wow. And look how good he looks. He's got a nice tan, too. Hey. But we're on a victorious path. That's why that monument in Senegal that the President Wade was asked by the African leaders to help create a monument, and that monument is the rise of the black family, the rise of the black man, and he's holding on his rock, the black woman, and he's holding his child up to the universe, up to God. And that child is not playing with the father. The child is pointing not north to where we usually look for sustenance, not east to the new boys on the block, not even southeast to Arabia, not even south to the rest of the African continent. That child is pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to the Africans in the New World, South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and North America. It is the unity of the Africans out of Africa with the Africans in Africa, which will lay the foundation for the next 100 years for our people. It's not going to be overnight. So Hillary is not the saving grace of black folk. It's not going to be.
It's a start.
It's not going to be what Martin
think
Luther
it'll be a
King
start.
laid out. We were trying to integrate with white folks. We need the basic integration is with ourselves. That's the integration which will allow us to integrate with others. But if we do not have the integration of self, we cannot go.
Thank you for the work that you've done. RLJ Foundation.
RLJ Foundation.
.org.
Yes.
You can expect there's going to be a couple thousand people who are logging on,
Well,
probably starting today, so that the information that's available through that site, we would like to disseminate.
Today is the birthday of my grandfather,
Amen.
who I never knew. He was born August the 10th, 1868, 1 foot out of slavery. And he was murdered by the Klan 50 years later on July 14th, 1917. And he's speaking to me now. And so we're the foundation work is going to be very important, because we're going to be linking up with other think tanks and other foundations. Sister Soldier will be at Abyssinian Baptist Church tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And I promised her that I would announce that so our family can be at Abyssinian. You can check with Reverend Butson. I'm sure he would not be opposed to that. And she's going to be dealing with the humanizing of our struggle.
And Doc, as usual.
We need more time. We need more
And
information.
if you wish to get personal information from me, call the home number, which is 201.
Thank you for coming.
837-1355.
And it's been
Power to our people.
And it's been a
we're on a
Gilchrist
victorious
experience. The
path.
God in me loves the God in you. And stay
Hey.
tuned for Dr. J coming back
Part 1.
for more of the Gilchrist experience.
RLJ Foundation.
Power to the people.
Yes.
God bless.
And the beauty is that
Beautiful.
it gives us a chance to coordinate the Dr. Ben legacy, the Dr. Clark legacy, the Gil Noble legacy, the 11